Welcome to the Environmentalist Nurse, the podcast exploring the intersection of nursing, public health, environmental health, and climate action. I'm Dr. LaDonna Gaines, and twice a month you'll hear conversations with experts and practical insights to help healthcare professionals protect both people and our planet. Let's get started. Welcome back to the Environmentalist Nurse Podcast. I hope you enjoyed the last episode that included my discussion with Kayla Williams. I learned so much from her, and I'm so glad she agreed to share her story and time with us. This week is time for another solo episode. Extreme heat is the deadliest weather-related hazard in the United States, yet many of us still think of it as simply another hot summer day. Today, we're going to talk about why extreme heat is becoming more common, how it affects our bodies, who is most at risk, and what nurses and communities can do to protect health. Here in Alabama, we've had weeks of temperatures in the mid to upper 90s, with heat indices over 100 degrees. We've also had almost daily afternoon thunderstorms. Funny enough, a colleague keeps joking that it's starting to feel like Florida. Those afternoon storms happen because the land heats much faster than the nearby ocean, creating sea breezes that collide and produce thunderstorms. So that's why it happens in Florida. Not sure why it's happening here, but hey, I agreed with her thought there. All right, so let's go ahead and get into this week's climate health headline. The recent headline that caught my attention was Heat Dome expands across the central United States, creating dangerous conditions for millions. The article discusses that approximately 70 million people will be affected by extreme heat the coming week. The article was published on July 25th, 2026. The heat wave stretches from Texas to North Dakota, with areas reaching temperatures over 100 degrees Fahrenheit. A heat dome is expected, and this is where atmospheric pressures trap heat. This means that temperatures won't lower significantly, giving people less of a chance to recuperate. Temperatures will be 10 to 15 degrees higher than normal in some areas. Some areas of the U.S. may see some relief, but only briefly. The last thing I'll mention about this article is the mention that we have already had significant extreme weather this summer. They specifically mentioned the need to cancel 4th of July celebrations due to the heat that happened that weekend. It hasn't only been the U.S. this summer, but Europe has seen significant extreme heat as well. So that's the headline for the week. This article is by the Associated Press. Let's go ahead and get started on this week's show topic. So, as I mentioned, we will be talking about heat today. Let's start with the definition of extreme heat. I found more than one definition, but I'll mention the one that I saw more than once. According to heat.gov, the definition of extreme heat is a temperature that is much hotter and or humid than average. Because some places are hotter than others, this depends on what's considered average for a particular location that time of year. This definition takes into account that places who typically see temperatures over 100 degrees Fahrenheit during the summer are not the same as places who typically see temperatures around the mid-80s. Those places that normally have temperatures above 100 usually have the infrastructure in place to an extent. For an example, the way buildings and homes are built in Arizona and New Mexico, which are states more likely to have those temps above 100, are very different from the way homes and buildings are built in, say, Tennessee and Mississippi. So now let's define what a heat index is. According to the National Weather Service, the heat index, also known as the apparent temperature, is what the temperature feels like to the human body when relative humidity is combined with the air temperature. Humidity makes sweating less effective. Normally, sweat evaporates and cools the body. When the air is already full of moisture, that sweat can't evaporate as efficiently, making it much harder for our bodies to cool themselves. So that's something to consider when you're looking at the heat index and humidity, etc. I wanted to make sure I mention these definitions here since we hear or see them a lot, but may not actually know the true definition. We do know that it's more about how the heat feels in relation to the actual temperature, but now we have the scientific definition. I want to define two more things before we move forward. Both of these come from heat.gov. The first is a heat wave, because you probably heard this term before, and it is defined as a period of abnormally hot weather, generally lasting more than 2 days. The other is a heat dome because it is mentioned in the headline for today's episode. There was a brief description, but I'm going to go into the scientific definition here. It is an exceptionally hot air mass that develops when high pressure aloft prevents warm air below from rising, thus trapping the warm air as if it were in a dome. Now that we've defined these terms, let's talk about why all of this matters. So, why is extreme heat becoming more common? The main reason is climate change. Average temperatures are continuing to rise across the world. As of right now, this rise in average temperatures is projected to continue. So why is extreme heat a concern? Well, I'm sure most of us can figure that out. Heat-related illness is a real thing. Heat can have many effects on the body, which can in return have an effect on our healthcare systems and economics. Due to increased temperatures, there has been an increase in emergency department visits in my area due to heat-related illness. But interestingly, beyond that, there have also been emergency department visits for poor mental health related to the heat. Let's start briefly with the mental health aspect. Researchers are seeing increases in emergency department visits related to anxiety, mood disorders, and other mental health problems during periods of extreme heat. While we are not 100% sure why yet, heat appears to place additional stress on both the brain and the body. So, we don't have a lot of information yet on the mental aspect, but we do know that it is an issue. So now let's talk about how heat directly affects the body. An interesting fact to start with is heat is the number one cause of deaths related to weather. In the United States, it causes more deaths than hurricanes, tornadoes, floods, and lightning in most years combined. That's a staggering number for heat, especially when you consider the amount of deaths we have from these other events. I really wanted to mention that early on so that we really can grasp why extreme heat is such a big problem. So now let's get into the direct health effects that we can see from heat. Heat can cause heat exhaustion and or heat stroke as well. Heat exhaustion happens when there is significant fluid and electrolyte loss from the body. You can also see heat cramps from the same cause. If not treated, it can lead to heat stroke. Heat stroke occurs when the temperature regulating system of the body is overcome by the heat and can no longer work correctly. Heat stroke can be deadly. There's also the possibility of worsening of chronic conditions, especially those with cardiac or respiratory conditions and diabetes. Now that we know kind of the biggest effects that we can see, who is the most vulnerable? Well, just like with many other environmental issues, those most vulnerable to the effects of extreme heat are children, people over 65, as already just mentioned, those with chronic health conditions, and those who are pregnant. I'll also mention here that the likelihood of heat exhaustion and heat stroke can be affected by drugs that interfere with the body's natural cooling system, such as sweating, and the medications that can affect how the heart handles high temperatures. These drugs include diuretics, beta blockers, and anticholinergic. We've talked about how heat affects individuals, but extreme heat is also a community issue. Before we move on, I want to stop and discuss heat islands and the issue of environmental justice concerns around them. Now let's define environmental justice and heat islands. Environmental justice is the fair treatment of people of all races, cultures, incomes, and educational levels with respect to the development and enforcement of environmental laws, regulations, and policies. Fair treatment implies that no population should be forced to shoulder a disproportionate share of exposure to the negative effects of pollution due to lack of political or economic strength. So that's the definition of environmental justice. Now let's look at what a heat island is. Heat islands are in more urban areas, in other words, more developed areas. There's usually more concrete and less green space. Due to this, these areas can have higher temperatures than the areas around them. It is worsened by the fact that the buildings, roads, and other framework will take the heat up and then put it back out. This is not something you typically see with green spaces and water. Beyond this fact of it being hotter in heat islands, they usually occur around minorities and those with lower income. These populations have historically had less access to green space and less funds for cooling of their homes. This issue is only going to worsen over time as climate change continues to increase temperatures. As a result, these communities often experience more heat exposure and have fewer ways available to reduce that risk. So, as you can see, this issue of heat islands fits very well within the need for environmental justice for certain populations. So, something to keep in mind, something that we need to continue to work towards. Now, let's discuss ways to prevent heat related illness. Staying cool, staying hydrated, and knowing the early signs and symptoms of heat related illness. People can keep cool by taking breaks from the heat when they can, getting shade, and limiting outdoor activities to the time of day when temperatures are the lowest when it's possible. To stay hydrated, consider keeping a water bottle at all times when outside. Limit other drinks that can enhance the likelihood of dehydration, such as alcohol, drinks that have caffeine, and drinks that are high in sugar and/or salt. For nurses, you can counsel patients to monitor their urine color, making sure it is light yellow or clear to help determine their hydration. When inside, people should use fans and air conditioning when available. There are a wide range of symptoms to monitor for, so we need to make sure we educate people on those. And they include dizziness, excessive sweating, cramping, headaches, nausea, shortness of breath, and weakness. As a quick reminder, we want to make sure people remember to never leave people or pets in parked cars that are turned off and not running their air conditioning. I'm jumping in real quick here because as I was putting the final touches on this episode, I got an email about the A&E Fellowship. They are going to have a fifth cohort. Hopefully, some of you guys will apply. So the applications will open on August 4th. This will come out on August 7th. So applications will be open when you hear this. It is closing on September 4th. So the deadline to submit your application is September 4th. And participants will be notified of acceptance by October 16th. There's a total of 18 spots for nurse fellows. I've talked about this many times. Very excited that there's a cohort number 5. So if this is something you've thought about, please, please, please apply. I've got the link below in the show notes. If you have any questions, feel free to directly email me. My email is also in the show notes. Now let's get back to today's topic. So what can nurses do? Nurses can help to handle extreme heat by determining who their at-risk patients are. As already discussed, we can educate our patients on extreme heat illness. One of the biggest things nurses can do is let them know how to minimize their risk, the signs and symptoms to watch for, and how they can keep their homes cool so that their exposure is limited even more. If you are seeing a patient who has already become overheated, it is important to implement swift ways to cool the patient. And some ways you can do this are getting them to an air-conditioned area ASAP, or at a minimum into a shaded area until air conditioning is available. You can also put ice packs and/or cold compresses on them to help cool them. Last but not least, for those who have limited access to ways to cool themselves, make sure they know when and where cooling centers are available. Make sure you remind those who are working outdoors understand the importance of staying hydrated and taking several cooling breaks. Lastly, I encourage you to refer your patients to the CDC heat risk dashboard. They can put in their zip code and determine their risk for that specific day. The link for that will be in the show notes. But beyond caring for your patients, nurses, we also have an opportunity to advocate for healthier communities by supporting cooling centers, tree and green space additions, better housing, and local heat action plans. So now let's look at community and policy solutions for extreme heat. Communities can provide cooling centers, increase the green space, and make sure everyone is aware of the potential dangers of extreme heat. Just like the nurses, community members can check on the most vulnerable people in their neighborhoods and make sure they have what they need, like fans and water, or know how to get what they need. Communities can also set up alert systems and emergency guidelines. So I know a lot of these things are repetitive, but if you are letting someone know about this information, let's say a community member versus a nurse, then there is overlap, and there's some things that other people that are not nurses, they can do things that can help. So even though it just seems like it's repetitive, this is just a way to remind you to let others know how they can help in this issue. That is the information on extreme heat. Now, let's move on to practical takeaways and clinical pearls for today's episode. Extreme heat is an ongoing problem for the foreseeable future. It is the number one cause of weather-related death. We can keep each other safe and healthy. One thing to remember is to educate your patients, families, and communities on ways to stay safe and when to seek treatment. Urban communities can help lower their risk of exposure by adding green spaces and invoking cooling centers when needed. We need to be there for each other. Check on the most vulnerable. Make sure they have what they need or they know how to get it. Now, for this week's resource spotlight. This week, I would like to spotlight the 1A podcast episode titled Climate, Fighting Extreme Heat in 2026. The podcast is a part of NPR. If today's discussion interests you, I recommend this episode. In this episode, the guest host interviews the Miami-Dade mayor about what they have been doing regarding extreme heat. The guest host also interviews an environmental epidemiologist and a staff writer with Heat Map News. Very, very good episode. The link will be in the show notes as well. For hope in action. There is hope. Around the U.S. and around the world, communities are planting trees, using cooling centers, making important changes to neighborhoods, increasing emergency heat response, and looking at cleaner energy alternatives. These solutions not only reduce heat exposure today, they also help to slow climate change for the future. So all is not lost. It may be an uphill battle, but we can continue to do these things that I just mentioned to help ourselves. Since it's a solo episode, you get the Environmentalist Nurse prescription, and I actually have multiple this week. So this week, I'm prescribing these evidence-based actions based on information from the Duke University School of Nursing's article titled Summer is Coming, Nursing Safety Tips for Extreme Heat from Dr. Valerie K. Sable, Director of Planetary Health, and it's really a recap of what we discussed today. Prescription number 1. Drink fluids regularly, regardless of if you are feeling thirsty. Water is the top recommendation. Prescription number 2, plan around the heat. Don't exercise, run errands, do things in the yard, or walk dogs during the hottest part of the day. Prescription number 3, use cooling intentionally. Things like air conditioners and cold showers can help. Prescription number 4, prepare for power outages because with all of the energy being used to help keep things cool, some areas might be more likely to have these. So make sure water is available at all times. Make sure devices that are needed are charged or have sufficient batteries available. Make sure to know where cooling centers are located. Patients should keep a medication list on them in case they need to access them outside of their home or normal pharmacy. And lastly, prescription number 5, check on others. Call, text, or if appropriate, visit the most vulnerable at least daily during these times. We have really just scratched the surface on this topic. There are many other avenues that can be discussed related to extreme heat, such as how food and ecosystems are being affected. But that is all for today's episode. Thank you so much for joining me today. And remember, healthy environments create healthy people. Thanks for listening to the Environmentalist Nurse Podcast. If you enjoyed this episode, subscribe, leave a review, and share it with a colleague or two. Together, we can create healthier communities on a healthier planet. Until next time, stay curious, stay informed, and keep advocating for both people and our planet.